Hi, my name is Nicole Lasham, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Rainbow Times, New England's largest LGBTQ newspaper since 2006. Throughout these past 12 years, we've covered issues not only relating directly to the LGBTQ community, but also all of our individual, shared, and collective identities. This year, we wanted to sit down with the Salem At-Large City Council candidates and incumbents to find out exactly where they stand on the issues that impact all of us, especially those of us that live, work, play, and thrive in Salem. I'd like to thank all of the candidates that took the time to sit down with us in this intensive one-on-one interview, giving us for more than 45 minutes of their time so that you could understand, so that I could understand, so that we could collectively understand where exactly they stand on these issues. Those that participated were Melissa Faulkner, Conrad Prosniewski, George McCobb, Domingo Dominguez, Ty Hapworth, Alice Merkel, Elaine Milo, and last but not least, Jeff Cohen. Although all candidates were invited to participate, unfortunately, Belle Stedman and Gary Gill declined to be interviewed for the series. Likewise, Art Sargent was not able to be reached via email or phone and did not reply to our requests. On behalf of the Rainbow Times, its management and staff, our publisher, Grayson Ocasio, and myself, we thank you for watching this series. We hope that you learn just as much as we did. Let's get started. Conrad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes,
I was looking forward to it.
Your entry actually into the council race really took me by surprise. You just retired from the police force, correct?
Correct.
So why city council? Like, what was that sort of driving force or that pivotal moment where you said, I'm gonna jump in this race?
Well, about a year ago, I really didn't even have a clue that I was going to be going in this direction. It was one of the retiring city councilors that approached me, told me that he was going to be retiring, and thought it'd be a good idea if I ran for city council in his spot. He knew that I was aging out this year, which means that I'm 65 and I can no longer be a police officer. And the timing was right. He knows what I did for the community, and he asked me to think about it, and I told him, okay, I will think about it. And he then went forward and spread the rumor around that I was going to run. So all of a sudden I started to get phone calls, from different people in politics, different people in the cities, different people within the police department saying, you thinking about this? You thinking about this? And I said, I wasn't until, it was brought up to me. So I think the pivotal point was during a department Christmas party, a little informal party that one of our lieutenants had over his house. The other police officers presented me with a sign that said, Conrad Prosniewski, Counselor at Large. And
no pressure.
At first, it was wrapped up, and at first I'm saying, oh God, what is this picture they're giving me?
Sure.
Because they knew I was going to be leaving. But it turned out to be a sign, and that was kind of like that was the moment. That was the light bulb moment when I said, I've got the support of my own people doing this. I've got the community who's been asking about it, and I spoke to my family shortly thereafter that, and they were for it. So that was the green light.
Yeah, and I know obviously throughout your police career, obviously you moved up the ranks all the way to deputy chief, did you not?
Yeah, the executive officer, it's the same thing, yes.
Right, exactly. And so you have done really positive things, I know, at the police department, particularly relating not just to safety of the community, but also protecting the people and the rights as it relates to the LGBTQ community, to other racial and ethnic minority groups as well. And you served as the liaison for No Place for Hate as well. Can you tell me a little bit about what has driven you to really be an advocate for everybody?
I think that probably goes back to, well, you know, why do I want to become a police officer? Mm-hmm. And you realize, you know, that this is a great job, tremendous job. If you want to help somebody, if you want to help people, if that's your life's ambition, is just to be a good member of the community and help your fellow man, this is a perfect way to do it. It really is. It opened up my eyes a lot. I got on as a patrolman in 1978. Mm-hmm. I worked in the Point neighborhood of the city, which was predominantly Spanish then. Mm-hmm. I got into the culture with the people, enjoyed their stories, their backgrounds, their whole ethnic culture, their food. People were
the food,
you know,
right?
You know, I explained to them that I was, you know, first generation over here. My parents came over here after World War II, and you know, I was bilingual. I had to translate for my parents when I was young,
wow.
And yeah, I was accepted, you know, and I went to work with a smile. You know, I would see different people in different places. You get to see the good and you get to see the bad, but you get to help people. Yeah. After about 10 years in uniform, I was transferred to the detective division, mm-hmm. and I spent quite a few years, you know, doing what the detectives in Salem do, anything from you know, petty larcenies to homicides. Mm-hmm. And again, that was, it kind of let me expand on my police knowledge, you know, moving from patrolling and just answering calls to now going into investigations was very good, because now I got to follow the case. I didn't get to hand it off. I got to get to the end of it, catch the bad guy, you know, turn over every stone, do what I had to do to get the bad guy, exactly. Which wasn't the main goal. The main goal was helping the person mm-hmm. that was victimized by the bad guy. That's the rewarding part of it.
Exactly. What are you most passionate about?
You know, I'm probably passionate. The most passionate is probably how some people are unfairly treated by bias mm-hmm. and labeled and pointed fingers at, and you know, one of the best sayings that I remember since I was young was, you know, you never judge a person until you've walked in his shoes. And I'm very non-judgmental. When I approach a situation, I look at that person like I could be that person. Right. What drove this person to do this? Why did this happen? And you kind of sit back, take a look, and sometimes you get an understanding of what exactly happened, if as long as you get the patience to step back and don't right away let your biases carry you into a different direction.
And in terms of acceptance and accessibility to city services, all sorts of things, right? We have so many sort of issues, social justice related stuff going on in the city. I think it stems, you know, even from the national political sphere down to local. But you were a part of the police force when we, as a city, passed the Sanctuary for Peace Ordinance. That's correct.
I was on the committee that helped formulate the ordinance.
Right. And when you were helping to formulate that ordinance, what was your own personal feeling about the ordinance and why it was important to have it in place?
Well, it's tough to sit and listen to this ordinance with my background, knowing that I was the son of an immigrant and my parents a few decades ago may have been going through similar anxiety and similar processes. So during this process, I was thinking of what it was like back then compared to what it was now. And where do we treat people fairly? Where does this country finally absorb people and say, okay, I mean, the Statue of Liberty stands in New York Harbor, welcoming everybody that's going to add to this country. And that was in the back of my mind. What are we going to do to bring the people in? Mm-hmm. There has to be boundaries. We do. We have to have boundaries. Mm-hmm. There are certain people that come to this country with no intent to help other people or help anybody out but themselves. Mm-hmm. And vetting those people is the job of the government, is the job of the federal government. It's not our job as a local police department, but it is somebody's job, and somebody has to do that.
Mm-hmm. And from the local perspective, though, that ordinance did not, jeopardize any type of federal funding, and it also did not, it sort of gave the immigrant community free rein to call the police without fear of retribution or without fear of the police contacting ICE about their immigration status or anything like that. Can you explain a little bit to the viewers about how the ordinance keeps Salem safer?
I think the important thing that people should know is that the Salem Police Department and most police departments around, we're the local police. We are there to protect the community. We aren't there to ask before something happens. We're not there to ask, who are you, where you from, and then we're going to judge whether we're going to protect you or not. We don't. We're the guardians of the community. That's what we are. We're your protectors. And we don't ask people. If you're a victim, you're a victim. It doesn't make any difference your background, where you're from, whether you're here, documented or undocumented. We're going to protect you. And we wanted that documented. We wanted people to know that the police department does not ask them questions about whether or not they're here legally. They're victims. That's none of our business. It may be the business of the federal government, but it's not the business of the Salem Police Department. I think it was very important that the people know that if something happens and the police arrive, they're not going to have to worry about what's going to happen to them later on because they call the police. We are not a pipeline to the federal agency. We do our job as a community. We protect the community. We're part of the community. And that's what I think people should know.
And how do you think all of that experience that you have for, how many years were you in the police department? Several years, right?
Almost 41.
Right, a lot of
Almost
years.
41,
And
yeah.
so
I
how will that experience and everything that you've learned about Salem and the people of Salem and how the demographics of Salem are shifting and waxing and waning and the influx of people moving into Salem from, areas like more metropolitan like Boston or down, from New Hampshire or anything like that. How do you think that your experience in the police department will help to create a better community for everyone?
I think that my basis of knowledge of this community, based on my involvement with the community, especially with all the community programs that we've developed at the police station. I know that when community policing became the buzzword back in the early 90s, I had recently been promoted to Detective Sergeant, and Chief St. Pierre, knowing that I had an affinity with the community, a good relationship with the community, said, we've got to start integrating ourselves. We have to start opening up our doors. We have to become more transparent. People have to trust us. And the only way that we can do that is if we let them into our house and let them see what we do. So we developed different programs. The Citizens Police Academy was developed. I was put in charge of developing that. I think the first 10 years when I was in charge of that, we put over 600 people through that, and it's been now maintained, and it's going on with Lieutenant Barabee carrying it on. It still remains a very, very popular program. The Crime Watch program became an award-winning program. We got awarded at the State House for having one of the best cities around for the Crime Watch program. Behind the Badge was a local SATV show that was hosted by myself and another co-host, Lieutenant Jimmy Walker, which was a lot of fun to do. A lot of fun. And it was a live call-in show where people could call in and ask questions about the police department. Yeah. It was difficult to maintain because of funding and time constraints and different offices' schedules. But we did do it for a few years, and that actually won an award in Oxnard, California, as one of the best community police shows. So but besides that. The different neighborhood associations would always be calling the police departments into their meetings to address the police issues that they have in their certain sections. Being in charge of the community impact unit, I went to many, many, many meetings. I got to see not just the wards, but the neighborhoods within the wards of what exactly were the issues that were impacting their quality of life. And we did everything that we could as a police department to try to address that. So, it was staying in tune with the community that I think gives me the upper hand, the fact that I've contacted. In my job, I've had to work with all the different city departments, the health department, the building inspector, the fire department, every department in the city, planning, budgeting. And I know these people on a first-name basis. I know who they are. I know what they can do. I know what they can't do. I know who does a good job, who doesn't do a good job.
Right.
I know who who likes me, hopefully most of them, and who we get along with. And so I kind of know the mechanisms and how to navigate through to get things done, because I know who's responsible in the end.
Of course. And so getting things done, one of the questions that so many people have been talking about relates to the Traffic and Parking Commission.
Yes.
The famous commission, whose hands seem to be tied right now by the city council. The council, meaning, has been sitting on a proposal that the Traffic and Parking Commission proposed nearly 2 years ago. Haven't done anything with it. Basically, the Traffic and Parking Commission allows, things to get resolved more expediently relating to traffic and parking issues. But right now, like I said, their hands are tied. Do you support giving them authority to actually be able to move forward to address the issues expediently?
It's absolutely something that has to be moved forward and resolved. Either you do it or you don't do it, but it's already there's been a lot of thought put into that. Just get it done. It's going to be a thankless job. I'm sure that people are on that commission are going to be scratching their heads saying, what did I get myself into?
Yeah.
I mean, Salem has traffic problems.
Yeah.
It really does. I mean, our streets were not built to handle cars. They were built to handle horse and buggies and foot traffic.
Right.
And we've had to adapt those streets to vehicles, and it's been a challenge. The parking, and then again, with the parking department trying to get some revenue, it's going to be a challenge for the commission, but we have to move forward on that and do the best we can.
Okay. And how do you propose, we deal with all of this traffic coming into Salem and so many cars on the streets and things like that? There has to be a more efficient way for people to get around the city. What do you propose, what can you throw out there that maybe would help?
Yes, I've spoken about this before. I think that we have to kind of go back to the drawing board and get a traffic commission together that's going to think outside of the box and say, hey, let's take a look at our traffic patterns. Is this really working? Do these one-way streets work good for us? Do they not work good for us? I think it needs like a think tank in order to be able to say, it may be difficult to come up with a perfect solution, but I think that there are some ways where the city can change its traffic patterns, the city can, so that it doesn't impact the neighborhoods and makes traffic flow more efficiently. And I think working with the police department and with the parking and planning department and City Hall, I really am optimistic that something could be hammered out that people would say, oh, this is a change, but it's a good change. It's working.
Exactly. And do you know specifically, and do you have any ideas, like specific ideas with that, or because you would need to collaborate with the other departments to figure that out? It was,
I have my own ideas, which I like to throw to some people and say, what do you think of this? And they may say, no, that's a bad idea. And I would understand. But I know that Salem's changed.
Yeah.
Tourism traffic, especially in September and October, it's something that has to be dealt with uniquely during that time. The impact of Salem State College and the students, and when school opens with our public schools, that creates a whole different traffic dynamics that I think needs to be addressed. Also, we have the expansion of the North Shore Medical Center. We're now going to be the largest hospital north of Boston. Yeah. They're changing their emergency room entrance from Highland Avenue over to Jefferson Avenue. There's going to be a traffic impact over there. But with these things happening, I think it's a good time to take a look and see what can we do to change things to make them better.
Yeah. Do you see that there needs to be more progress in Salem as it relates to development and growing the local economy that is separate from October? Everyone knows, October is a huge tourism month. The city makes a lot of money during that time. The business owners make a lot of money during that time. What about the rest of the year? Do you have any type of innovative ideas that would help to grow the local economy year-round?
Well, everybody knows that the businesses downtown, they wait for haunted happenings. They wait for September, October to come around because that's where they make their money. I think too much emphasis has been put on that particular part of Salem. We have a rich maritime and waterfront area that we could be using throughout different times of the year. We also have a history that should be expanded on with a little bit more legitimacy. I don't like our history with the witchcraft trials has brought out a lot of the schlock in Salem, but I would like to see something that would be year-round, that would put a responsible and credible view of exactly what happened and the lessons of tolerance that Salem learned from those. And I think that's one of the reasons that we're such a diverse, unique community over here. Is I think we learned a lesson a long time ago. I know it was taught in all the schools, public and private schools, what the witchcraft trials, what people were labeled, what happened, the tragedy that happened. And this community learned from that, and I think it's been passed on.
In terms also, sort of while we're on the development topic, some people have asked about a business improvement district. Do you support business, having downtown, for example, have a business improvement district?
If the businesses downtown want to get together and pull their money to improve things in the city, it'd be crazy not to go for that. I mean, I would love to see their ideas, what they think should be improved, and if they want to add to the funding of that to help improve the city, that's a no-brainer. I'm for that.
Okay. Also, if we're looking at things like the climate crisis, so to speak, a lot of families, obviously everybody that lives in Salem or, you know, the country, the world, is experiencing what they have upgraded from climate change to a climate crisis. First, do you believe that there is a climate crisis? And second, what can we do locally to combat that?
Well, Salem's a waterfront community. So I think the impact on us has to be taken more seriously because of the rising tides and the rising oceans. I'm old enough to see that. 65 years old. Yeah. I lived on the waterfront, lived near a beach, and I've seen the beaches go away. I've seen the impact of the erosion. I know our seawalls are slowly being shored up. The city does have plans, a resiliency plan for the climate change that people put a lot of thought into, and I'm grateful for that. But that is happening, and we have to be able to look down the road and try to protect the city and the community from what may or may not happen.
Do you have any ideas in terms of sustainability and things like that the city could look into or should look into to create more of a green landscape, so to speak, in terms of having like more environmentally friendly city, like anything from, you know, like how we got rid of the plastic bags. Right now we're using these paper bags instead. Right. So that's one step in the right direction. Right. Do you know of anything else, or can you think of anything else that? Sure,
I think the city should be looking at all kinds of alternative energy sources, whether that's feasible, even if it may be cost effective down the road. I think that's something that we should be looking at. I know that the power plant has changed its fuel from to a more green, even though it's not perfect. It's at least it's gas. It's not coal and oil fired anymore. And protecting our green spaces, you know, is important. I mean, we're 45,000 people packed into an 8 square mile area, and it's not that we have that much green space. What we have now, we have to keep.
How would you, if you were elected to the council, how would you work with others who may not even acknowledge that there is a climate crisis or who are opposed to making those changes?
Well, I'd be surprised. I like the candidates, and I think our city council, I don't think that anybody is oblivious to it. You'd have to have your head in the sand to be able to say, no, there's nothing's happening, everything. No, there's something happening. We just have to, it's just tough to look in the crystal ball and see exactly what is happening. But from what the professionals and the scientists are telling us, because we're the waterfront community and some flood zones that we have in the city, I know that the city's already taken some steps, like on Canal Street, to mitigate the flooding that I remember for generations being down by McDonald's and the O'Keefe Center and in that area there. There's already the new pumping station that's going to take the water out of that area and send it over to the Forest River Park area. That was done to to offset that, and so far so good. So it's not completely finished, but I think we've solved one little problem. There's other areas that have to be addressed too, but I think that the city leaders are aware of it and are working on it.
And your vote would be to preserve the
Absolutely,
environment.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I have a associate's degree in environmental science.
Oh, wow, that's useful. Yeah.
Former Eagle Scout. I was
Yeah.
very much in tune to the environment and environmental issues. That's something that I learned early on, the importance of that. So yes, I am. I'm a strong advocate.
We had some people chime in with some questions for us. And a lot of questions had to do with accessibility for people with disabilities. We know that there are sidewalks in Salem that are in grave condition, that are very inaccessible. We have, of course, the cobblestone in Derby Square that's very difficult for people to be able to get down. There are just so many different sort of sections of the city that make it impossible. Even some buildings don't have, elevators that are easily accessible to be able to be used.
That's right.
What can we do to help with those types of issues so that people can access our downtown locations and our buildings and, the places they should be?
It's time that we start thinking about all that every time that we go forward with any project, with any building project. I know we have the issues now, which hopefully can be fixed, the sidewalk problems, the handicap accessible ramps. I've worked with the Salem Council on Disabilities about the handicap parking program and the enforcement of that. It's our responsibility to make sure that everyone has equal access, equal access, anywhere they want to go, regardless of their disability. So moving forward, any decision that needs to be made, you have to think of, is this a decision how is it going to impact the different people with different disabilities? And I think that kind of progressive thinking will lead to positive changes down the road. In the meantime, we've got to address the old city, before there was any of that culture, and when the sidewalks were narrow, the tree roots that go through the ground and the sidewalks, making it difficult for anybody with any disability. Even some normal people are having issues walking on them. And but I can see that there are some positive changes that are slowly being made, and we have to continue that.
Yeah, because some people are talking obviously about preserving the integrity of the cobblestones, for example. Preserving the integrity of the history of the city is important, and I think it's important to a lot of people. But where do you where do you balance the importance of, the integrity of the cobblestones versus residents actually being able to use, the sidewalks and streets as they are intended? And so do you think that there is a way to sort of preserve those types of areas with like cobblestones and stuff like that, but also making it better accessible so people can also have access?
I do. I know that when the cobblestones and the bricks were put there, people weren't thinking about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we're thinking about it, what are we going to do that's going to preserve that and yet make it accessible? I think that there has to be some kind of a combination where you can have cobblestones, but somehow grade them or pay attention to how people are going to navigate over those if they have a disability. How are the wheelchairs, how are the blind people, how are the people who have difficulty walking. And I think that preserving the look, but yet giving some thought to customizing it to do that, again, that would be something that people could put their heads together and come out with something that would be satisfactory to everybody.
Right, and then like when you're looking downtown, you see a lot of art, a lot of arts projects. Salem tends to have a very prominent artistic community. Do you see the arts as being a critical part of Salem culture? And what would you do to ensure, if you do believe that it is, what would you do to ensure that the arts are sustainable to continue to bring diversity and inclusion?
People come off the train and they come to downtown Salem, and working downtown with all these years in the public's eye, I watch them. they look,
Yeah.
they see, and they say, look at that, look at that, look at that.
Yeah.
That's because we nurture what's the arts. We nurture having all this available that people give them the wow factor. I think that's what brings people in. And that's part of our culture. And I think should keep moving in a very forward direction too.
Would you support, if there's not already funding allocated to the arts, would you support adding additional funding if available to the arts?
Absolutely. I think we can do a lot more. I think there's a lot, even outside of the downtown area, I think there's a lot of buildings that can be utilized for the arts that would
To sort of revitalize.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Take it away just from downtown, but
Yeah.
there are some properties that could be used for the arts. It's a matter of, getting everybody together and saying, this is a beautiful building, let's do something with it that's gonna advance the culture and the arts, and let's do it.
Great. Right now, there's a housing crisis in Salem. I think it's about 50% of people who are paying rent or their mortgages are struggling with, do I pay my rent in full, or do I put some groceries, and food on the table? I think anybody pretty much would agree that should not be the case. What do we do to address the affordability, first of all, of housing in Salem? And what do we do in terms of development of housing? Like, is there a need for more housing at affordable rates?
The diversity of the city, and don't mean the people, but it's buildings, it's homes, it's structures. I think the city city thrives on a diverse culture in that aspect. What has to be addressed is we have to keep that culture going. There has to be affordable housing. There has to be housing for everybody from one end of the spectrum to the other. Some of the things that we've done was, I know that Salem does have quite a bit of affordable housing, but if you take a look at the way that things were built and the way that things were allocated, it doesn't lend itself to a comfortable environment. I know that some of the high-rise buildings, which are low-income families, it's uncomfortable for them because of the size of the area and the type of environment that is over there. I think that we may have learned a lesson from that by saying, maybe we shouldn't build such large areas. Maybe we should diversify it, taking use of the old churches, the old schools, the old public buildings, maybe some of the empty lots, and making little pockets of affordable, where people would still be comfortable, still be affordable, and not impacted by such a large, depressed area.
Right. Do you think that in terms of the available housing that is in Salem, there are a lot of people that can't afford, to buy a home for $250,000, $350,000, $450,000. And so a lot of people are choosing to rent, but rent continues to be driven up, of course. There's a huge demand. Salem is experiencing a huge influx of people from Boston, for example. Right. There are concerns about it becoming gentrified, right, and getting rid of a lot of, right, lifelong Salemites and new Salemites, right, relatively new over, say, the last 10 years or, right, so, because of affordability. Yeah. How do we address that, yeah, problem? It's happening, Nicole. That's happening because Salem is such a welcoming community and such a pretty community and has its history. People come here and say, "Oh, I like it. I want to move in here." Mm-hmm. Right. And the gentrification is happening. I think it's the responsibility of the city leaders to say, "Hey, look, if this wave continues, it's not going to be good for the city. Mm-hmm. We have to be able to balance this. Mm-hmm. The diversity has to be balanced. Mm-hmm. We've got to be able to take a look and say, okay, this is the plan that we're going to do. We're going to have to take a look at how we can continue to stay diverse, stay happily diverse, and yet have affordable housing for everybody that lives here, basically." Right. Felipe from Salem sent us a question, and I wanted to pass it by you and see what you thought. Felipe says there is a clear disparity in the cleanliness and street maintenance of Salem neighborhoods, with poorer areas being less clean and less maintained than wealthier ones. What policies and strategies would you pursue to fix this problem?
That's a great question, Felipe. Yeah, that's a good one. I know the areas he's talking about, and
Yeah.
I can tell you that the city spends more time there trying to clean up the more urban areas than the other areas of town. The difficulty is you have so many people and so many vehicles in such a tight spot that the approach to be able to do that is you can't just say, okay, we're going to move the furniture and sweep the place clean and do that every day. That just can't be done down there. It's easier in some other neighborhoods to be able to post and say, look, we're going to be cleaning up over here, and after they do, it stays that way. There's just so many people in our urban areas, and it's so difficult to keep it clean. The important part is there has to be some responsibility on the people that live there. In any neighborhood, I think it's the responsibility of the neighborhood to sort of police itself. You know, don't be ignorant to the fact if you need no more trash barrels, that's fine. If you need the street sweepers to come by and you want to have something done, you can bring that up to the city. But at least try to do something yourself to keep it clean. Don't expect other people to do it for you. I think we have some responsibilities as residents ourselves to police our own neighborhood and keep it clean.
Are more funds being allocated to the wealthier areas for street maintenance and cleanliness than our poorer areas?
I don't know what's being allocated. I'll be honest with you. I'm not in tune. I do know that the resources for the city, cleaning, we spend a lot of money cleaning. Any time of the year you go, you'll see orange signs posted throughout the city
I see
for
that.
cleaning.
Yeah.
So the city is spending a lot of money trying to keep it clean.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure exactly about which neighborhoods are allocated and everything. I do know that I do see a lot of the money being spent down in the urban areas to keep that clean. And there's just a difficulty of doing that because of the amount of people and the buildings, the cars.
Do you think that the funds being spent in the areas should be equitable? For example, on Chestnut Street, should the money that's going into Chestnut Street cleanliness or maintenance, should that be the same thing as, I don't know, somewhere in the Point, for example?
No, I don't think it should be equitable. I think you should look at the problem and say, how are we going to clean up this area and how are we going to clean up that area and what's it going to cost? If that area doesn't need cleaning as often as that one does, then you spend more money on the area that needs cleaning.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay, cool. Conrad, what would you say are your top 3 priorities if you got into council?
Okay. I think being a voice for the people, with my background in the community policing and listening to the people in all their different issues, I have kind of I know the ingredients that it would take to fix a lot of these issues. Some of them were outside the police, but they needed to be fixed more from a city level. I would bring those issues on behalf of the residents to a different level. I wouldn't be trapped within the borders of just being a police officer. I would be able to open myself up a little bit more and help out a little bit more. My priority number 1 is helping people and helping their quality of life, listening to them, listening to what their concerns are, and trying to address their issues to the best of my ability. That's my number 1. My number 2 is probably addressing the impact of the change of the city that it's going through. How Haunted Happenings has changed the city, how Salem State College has changed the city, how the North Shore Medical Center is changing the city. We have to be able to adapt ourselves so that doesn't impact the quality of life for all our residents. Salem was here before a lot of that stuff was here. I certainly was here before Halloween was here. When I started on the police department, Halloween was like any other community around us, and all of a sudden there was a spark that ignited, and this is what we have today, and there's an impact from that. It's both positive and negative. So, and the third, of course, keeping the culture and the diversity of this city thriving is probably the most important, and it all coincides. It's a cousin with the quality of life and everything else.
If there was a marginalized group, for example, or multiple marginalized groups that were experiencing an issue of inequity in one way or the other, whether it be the LGBTQ community, whether it be the Latino community, whether it be something's happening with sexual harassment in women in the community, whatever the situation was, you, based on what your answers are, I am assuming that you would stand on the side of protecting the marginalized groups. Is that accurate?
I think that's very accurate. I was a civil rights investigator. I worked with the No Place for Hate Committee since its inception. I've been part of the governor's hate crimes task force when it began with Lenny Zakem. I grew up in an atmosphere where you don't, the word tolerate is not even acceptable. Labels are for cans, they're not for people. It's not, again, you don't judge a person. You have to understand that we're just all people, and we all have our needs, and we all have things that are important for us, and we all should live our lives happily and get along without hurting anybody else. That's just the basics. Regardless of anything else, really doesn't matter. You protect everybody equally, you respect everybody equally, and there should be no barriers because of biases. That's basically it.
Thank you, Conrad. It has been such a pleasure sitting down with you, and I really appreciate the time that you took to speak with us, and wish you the very best luck.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It was a very nice interview. Good job. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it. Thank you.